All right, so for the very final, to close this all out, we've kicked up a lot of ideas. There's lots of things that have been going through, and we want to try and leave you with some kind of making sense of all this so you can continue talking about it as you leave. And so we've invited a very significant person in the community, Celine Parrenas-Shimizu, who is a professor of Asian American Studies at Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara, a filmmaker, an intellectual, someone who's very, very knowledgeable about Asian American history and film history, to sort of offer a response to the entire session today, to give us a bit of a sort of a rundown of what are some of these big themes, big ideas that that have been brought up. And then we'll have a bit of time, maybe 20 minutes or so, to open it up and have a conversation about that. And I do want to say that Celine has a new book coming out. Her first book, which I think a lot of you probably have read, is The Hypersexuality of Race, Performing Asian American Women on Screen and Scene. And her new book, which will be coming out next month, Straitjacket Sexualities, Unbinding Asian American Manhoods in the Movies. So please welcome Celine.
Chiwei actually asked me to historicize this conversation a bit, and I think that's really smart to do. So Asian American cinema, or what we're talking about today, which is Asian American media, has always been defined as a struggle and as a movement. And it really started alongside the civil rights and Asian American movement from the 1960s and 70s, but it was really in the 80s, right, when the manifestos came out, and they really were manifestos. They were, we need to solve the problem of invisibility and distortion that Asian Americans have faced in mainstream media. It had that kind of language. And that kind of language really fueled the founding of nonprofit organizations in New York, in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, 30 to 40 years ago. So it was that kind of, problem solving. And we were going to solve the problems by creating nonprofits, by providing grants, by organizing film festivals and organizing distribution networks so that hundreds and hundreds of the short films would be taught at universities. We would then, at the universities, not only archive the work, we would create an audience, we would build an audience, we would theorize the work and really give respect to the filmmakers, and also create, a body of scholarship that will be remembered hundreds of years from now. How is Asian American cinema changing how we understand cinema itself? So this moment is particularly interesting, right? Because it was a gathering like this, but a much smaller one that founded NATA and CAM. But there's an energy around that's happening right now. The money is going away, but there's also money that's being created. What's happening? Where is the center? People are now making films that don't take advantage of the usual protocol. They no longer just write grants, et cetera, right? People just make stuff and they load it up. So things are changing. And so now Chiwei and Karen asked me to do this daunting task of summarizing the main points of the 5 presentations. So here we go. The main thrust of the first coupling is that power is now decentered with new technologies. And there's 2 kinds of power that we're talking about, which is the power of film itself and also the power of creating stories, original new stories that change the way we understand the world. So according to Gary Chu, this is a time of huge potential. He alerts us to how technology remaps our social relations out of the hierarchy into a new network. And if you saw the map that he made on screen, you can see that it isn't no longer this hierarchical structure, but supposedly this more web of power relations where we're all kind of scattered and we're all networked together. So there are many opportunities that exist, but I think we need to ask, are these equal positions of possibility? Do inequalities still exist, and do we all have equal access to the technologies of representation? Wendy Levy then reminds us to have faith in the power of stories to shape the world, and to use that faith in our work to inspire us to learn new languages and to take seriously what it means to have power that's decentered. So she's saying you can't just be a filmmaker who makes stories, you also have to really innovate, create new technology, learn language, learn code, change, she says, your very DNA as a filmmaker. You must do both. You must be aware of marketing. You must be aware of the politics of making films. So I have 3 questions based on their session. The first is, how do these new technologies actually further disenfranchise people? Because the digital divide truly exists, right? Within our Asian American community who has access to technology. And then the second question is, yes, it's true that Asian Americans have a lot of power, as many Asian Americans, in terms of the model minority myth, have been involved in industries that are making. I have so many friends who are early Google people. But how do you create investment in Asian American cinema? How do you create consciousness that people want to invest in our films? Do we create a film structure so that people are investing in a film to make money? Or are we creating film structure so that it's more like philanthropy? Like, what's the best way to do it? Then the last question, which I think is a question that will keep coming up, is what are the very real networks that we can create to make investors connect with filmmakers and invest in these stories? What more equal network can we imagine that truly enables diverse voices and visions that has always been the spirit of Asian American cinema? So moving on to the second pairing, the second pairing really illustrates, Wong Fu Productions and Ana Serrano really illustrates what Gary Chu was talking about with this more democratized network. Here we meet individuals who are really shaping the structure and changing the structure. And how, as Ana Serrano says, in my favorite moment of today, is that what we're doing is really an ethical event, that there's a lot of responsibility that we must take on, a lot of crises that are at stake. So it's not just a matter of opportunity that we have now, but it's also a kind of crisis moment. Where are we going? It was so fun to see, Wong Fu Productions, because they themselves have this really strong personality, right? Like that awesome exchange that they did. Like, oh no, you sit down. No, I'll go be the one who sits down. I mean, it was just so ridiculously funny, as they are, online. And also they're like these very physically good-looking men, right? And so, and I mentioned this, not to harass them, but to also to remind them that they are part of a long legacy of beautiful Asian men on screen for the past 100 years, Sessue Hayakawa, etc. So the question is, the question is, these guys are meeting a lot of people, in their tours. Over 1 million people are looking at their work, and they're telling stories that are so fresh, like they are, right? It's no longer like this intergenerational conflict stuff. It's, how do you brush your teeth with whiskey like Keisha does, right? It's just brilliant stuff. And so I remember when I first heard about Wong Fu, because I teach these large lecture cinema studies classes, 200, 400 kids every year are learning about Asian American cinema, right? We're introducing this work to them, and then they're like, Wong Fu is making all of this irrelevant. Professor. And so I watched their stuff, and this is the first film that I saw, this Keisha whiskey. How do you brush your teeth with whiskey? Let's test out the theory. And there they were, in this amazing, almost like brand new world of Asian America. There they are with all of their friends, white people, black people, and there they were, just being Asian American. They weren't being foreign, they were just friends with people and doing their thing, But I mentioned this because I want to also say that yeah, you can be authentic, you can be yourself, and that's the struggle that they were talking about, but I think authenticity is a crock, right? Any representation is always a mediation, it's always a production. We're inventing stuff. It's not you that's out there, it's some version of you that you want to present, and that has a history. That is what Ana Serrano says is a moment of responsibility, right? Because Wong Fu Productions, you're making your stuff. Yes, you are part of the network, but you're also part of the structure because Subaru is coming up to you and asking you to make stuff, right? So it's not an innocent moment. So Wong Fu is an example of both structure and individual all at the same time. And it's a moment of ethical responsibility. It's a serious thing, and I hope that, I think these guys are so great because they're sitting here listening, and really taking this moment very seriously because their work has implications. They're not just expressing themselves in a vacuum. I mean, what Wong Fu really captures is that there is still that hunger, there is still that anger for being so invisible, in representation. People really need to see Asian Americans out there. And so I love, love, love that Ana Serrano says cinema and new media is a technology of ethics. And what does this mean? It's a site of responsibility for everybody involved. And I'm not just talking about, there's this long history of hot Asian men in the movies, and they are shaping our world. It's a political interaction. And you have to be fresh. You have to be authentic. But you also have to say, well, how am I also enabling certain news stories to be told, and how am I also closing down certain stories that to be told. Because another part of the history is that, isn't it interesting that it's all these guys still who are making this work online? And we have a history in Asian American cinema of men making the narratives. And it is women who are doing the housekeeping work of making documentaries, right? Sorry, that's a horrible thing to say. But isn't that interesting? You know, this is a discussion that happens, right, behind the scenes, right? And I don't mean to demean documentary, because I think, hands down, documentary is a confrontation with reality that is absolutely terrifying. And there they are, the women are doing it because they're so brave and so awesome, right? So anyway, in sum, the question for session 2 for me is, what doors will you open and what doors will you close? What new relations and what new empathies can be told? There's a lot of possibility, but it's also a very dangerous time. So session 3. I have 3 questions for session 3. I really love the data that was presented on television watching. Asian Americans use YouTube versus Facebook more. They watch less television, and it's really true. My students are not enslaved to the schedule of television anymore. They are watching online all the time. You know, I was invited to be in charge of the Oxford Encyclopedia entry on Asian American cinema. That's interesting, right? Like, Oxford Encyclopedia now recognizes Asian American cinema as an object worth knowing forever, right? And what's so interesting about it is that it's also online. So they're saying, oh, you can be in charge of it as long as you're alive, right? You know, watch out, see what happens. And then, as long as it's reviewed well. So when I submitted this description of Asian American cinema, I included Wong Fu, Ryan Higa, all of these guys, and the review said, this is not valid Asian American cinema. It's too ephemeral. We need more feature films. That was like the valid, recognized, you know, media, you know, that deserved space. But of course, Oxford's so great, they disagreed with that, and they're letting all of this material be included. So I found that discussion in that session 3 really exciting. We could leave and say, ooh, there was some spicy fighting that was going on. Hierarchy was rearing its head you know, but if it's true that we are more of a network, it's true that there is a struggle about, well, what is the best way, what is the best form in which to represent us? So I want to say that there are inequalities, right? Like, yeah, you have to be super privileged to be able to be even to articulate yourself so that you can even be part of a pitching process, right? I mean, I think, I'm sorry, the Whitney person, like, you went to Stanford, you know how to talk, right? I mean, like, you know, like, not all of us went to Stanford. I mean, I went to Stanford, but not all of us went to Stanford, right? Like, we don't all have the language to represent our people, right? And I really admire the work that you're doing on television. You know, it's almost like it's also an incredible position of responsibility. You're representing us. But, you know, I think it's really important to say that we need to fight at all fronts of the battle. And some of us are more prepared to fight, you know, in different sites, and we all have a place in the struggle. I find it really inspiring that there's this wonderful session on YouTube called Awkward Black Girl. Have you guys seen that? You should check it out. It's so fun. But what's so interesting about her is that she's saying she kind of wants to be like Oprah, where she wants to continue owning Awkward Black Girl, and let's see what happens. So anyway, what motivates this moment, I think, today too, in terms of that wonderful fight that happened in session 3, is that, you know, the state of independent media funding is really scary today. And I think now more than ever, all these filmmakers are here in this room because we are so invested in seeing how can we continue to make films. This is the question that Corinne asked, you know, am I alone in the fear of how can I sustain a life in this work, right? So session 4, I love the spirit of self-determination, creating our own path. I think that's a good reminder that this session gives us, to boldly dare to say we are important in this country, and the processes that we need to invent should be self-determined, and that we need to continue to create and innovate and you know, come up with new forms. And I think the best part of session 4 was the reminder that CAM, VC, et cetera, continue to be relevant. I think it's important to remember when Asian America cinema first started out, it was all about documentary, and then we were going to go to narrative, and it was really celebrated when this huge cohort of filmmakers in the 80s and 90s, Chris Chanley, Justin Lin, started making feature films, and that was really celebrated. So I think like this forum today is a great example of that continued support that organizations like this continue to offer. I think the main thing I want to say about session 4 is that filmmakers need help more than ever. And VC and CAM, Asian Cinevision, San Diego Asian Film Foundation, we need you. And we appreciate all the work that you're doing still. It was wonderful to end with session 5 and the work of Musa, because he's like the model minority of Asian American filmmakers, right? Like there he is, like making these beautiful feature films that hit it at Sundance, and he's making these wonderful, fun Facebook games. And beyond that multiple forms that he's working on, he's also saying that we need to have both. We need to have incredible craft that blows your mind, but also incredible new content. So he's saying we have to have both. Innovate the form. This is the spirit of Asian American cinema. You know, Renee Tajima Pena a long time ago said that the technology keeps changing, but the representation does not. But I think in your work that we see that it's doing both now, and it's such a wonderful thing. And it was wonderful to end with Rana when she says, we need to take advantage of the established community that CAM is all about, and that we have a lot of power. We need to stand up and try things out. Just because it's a scary moment in terms of funding, et cetera, it's also an incredible moment to innovate, to experiment, and to make things that are new, to Jeremy Lin it, in a sense. So we need to continue to innovate and to continue to politicize. So thanks for the opportunity.